Hello and welcome to the dive 10 thoughts with Kien. We are almost completely halfway through the split. We're going to get it right between week 5 as we're like halfway done with this weekend's games. How are you feeling about the halfway point?
Love being here. It's one of the. I feel like every time I try to make content, you hit the halfway, and I'm sure you guys get this with like the dive and on broadcast, where you want to do like a mid-season kind of segment or something on air, and then it's always, do you do it after week 4 or after week 5? It's always a little too early or a little too late, but
You need to
maybe
get that porridge
yeah,
just right.
yeah, back to back. It's like a week 4 we are doing our mid-season rankings, and then week 5 we are also doing a revised mid-season rankings after you guys have claimed us and we've adjusted it a little bit.
Mm-hmm. Luckily, this story for this split is it's been pretty clear
Yeah,
as far as top and bottom, and there hasn't been that much variation. I guess all the interesting stuff is happening around the conversation of who really is our second place team.
yeah.
Because there are a lot of contenders around here, and everybody's well aware of who's at the top and who's at the bottom.
Yeah, it's such a strange conversation where we almost feel resigned to the fact that Cloud9 is going to win the split, and so the rest of it is like, and Summers is more interesting just because 3 teams end up going to Worlds, so you get to say, okay, unlike Spring, the second and third place actually matters here. So there is actually value in trying to determine who the second, third best, even the fourth best team, like who are the ones actually fighting for that spot. So I think it is still exciting, even if we have to kind of ignore the elephant in the room, which is that Cloud9 is pretty clearly the best team and is pretty clearly going to win. Like, I don't think you can find a single analyst who would say something different in terms of who's going to win the summer split. I think literally every analyst, every person, you can go into a bronze solo queue game, and even a random person who's never watched a game probably knows Cloud9 is going to win the summer split.
Hmm. What about the ones in the second place then? As that becomes a little bit more dicey to dive into.
Yeah.
And Captain Flowers and I were casting this weekend in one of the Team Liquid games, and he brought up how much so many people over the past couple of weekends. There've been a lot of games where people start to bring out this opinion of, oh, they didn't deserve to win because the other team made this big mistake. And and I immediately responded to that with like, that never goes down well for me. If you have this big clump of, okay, we've got 4 teams that are tied for this second place and they're all pretty close, even if some plus or minus 1 game, um, especially if they're playing against that other team, how does the team that won off of a mistake
Yeah.
deserve it less than the team that made the mistake? So you can say, okay, it's not a clean game, and you got kind of gifted that game off of a mistake that wasn't even a forced error,
Uh-huh.
but the other team is capable of making these unforced errors. And I feel like maybe I just hung up on the terminology and then the deserved title.
As soon as you said that, because I could tell, because I remember like a team fight broke out and you had to like vent away from it for a second. But
Uh,
I just remember in that particular moment, I like jotted down in my head, oh, Kobe wants to hit on this a little bit more down the line. Is just on this word, and for me, it's like you said, right? If you flip the question on people, and when they say, "Oh, X does not deserve," and let's again, Team Liquid, I think is a great example of a team that people are saying this about. If you say Team Liquid doesn't deserve the win, and I would flip it around to you and ask you, does the team, like the team they beat, like Immortals, did they deserve to win even more? And you would say no, of course not. Like,
yeah.
like
And
the
then
thing.
people get to the point where they're like, all right, nobody deserves to win.
Yeah, I mean, there's such. It's not like the old days when you had the observer Timo that was in the game, and then you could just give the win to the Timo observer, right? It was one of those things where, it's like, unfortunately or fortunately, in a competition between 2 people where you were just waiting till the Nexus goes down, one person will get the win. That's just how sports works across every medium. It doesn't matter how ugly it is, as long as you get the job done. That's like League of Legends is a game where at the end of the day, Cloud9 winning in 23 minutes with a perfect game counts for 1 win on the score table. Team Liquid winning thanks to a Baron throw and then a base race at the 47-minute mark also counts for 1 win. that is the thing that you just have to accept if you're following the sport, right?
Yeah, you can definitely say I'm of the opinion that Team Liquid is not as strong as their record shows, or I believe a team with a worse record is actually a stronger team because of these factors and the way that they won these games. I'm totally fine with that, but to kind of place judgment on it and say that X teams don't deserve things, because we have even had the world champions make unforced errors. G2 for a long time as well made a lot of unforced errors, and people just kind of you laugh it off as like, haha, that goes along with part of the style and pushing the pace.
Well, I mean, I think IG is also another really good example of this. Like, even the year they won the world championship, nobody's watching the IG team and saying, "Oh wow, this was perfect League of Legends," right? Anytime you watch the LPL teams, even now, there's always a chaotic element to it that they end up like they create these chaotic situations, and they've been very good about coming out on top of these situations. But it's not anything you would look at and say, "Oh, that's clearly perfect League of Legends." It hasn't been since the LCK days, really, where SKT was winning, where you might look at a team and say, oh, they're really winning, quote unquote, perfectly. But I think that's kind of been upended since then in terms of like, what does it even mean for quote unquote perfect League of Legends to exist? And people want these like really clean macro games where they just starve out the other team. There's no option. There's no room for mistakes or whatever. And I think that one was just not very fun to watch in a lot of cases. And two, it's just not where we are these days. And it's one of these things where I've been thinking about this, and I talked to one of my friends about this quite a bit, is this idea of results oriented analysis versus actually judging a team. I think this is where the frustration comes in, and this is where I'm kind of curious from you. Is it's one thing to look at a team and say, oh, they won, that obviously means they're better, but your job as an analyst is to literally not do that, which is to look at a team and say, okay, I know they won, but my eye test says differently. And I think where a lot of the confusion from fans comes in is, let's say they're a TSM fan and you are critical of their team. A lot of times it can be difficult to agree on what the eye test looks like. And so I'm kind of curious if you can talk a little bit more about when you say, okay, we don't think Team Liquid is maybe as good as a 6-2 record might indicate, like, what would that actually look like? And why is that the case?
I mean, that comes from watching the actual plays and the performances, and unforced errors is definitely a big part of that. Decision making as far as your macro game is going to be a huge part. One of the critical areas that people have been looking at for TSM as your example, of course, is their mid game. Their early game was exceptional. This last weekend, they had all outer towers down by 17 minutes with Bjergsen on TF, just teleporting topside, using the ultimate to the other side of the map, boom, boom, like creating, you just go down this checklist and you're like, oh my God, this team is so good. And, as the game is progressing and you make correct move after correct move after correct move and good play after good play, your rating rises and rises and rises. And then towards the mid game and you have your decision tree. Okay, there's one option here where you group up as 4 people and you're just sitting outside their tower, not gaining any further advantage, or you're dragon stacking on timer, or you're going after X other win condition of playing side lanes or something like that. And I think that's one of the reasons why League of Legends is so interesting, because there are so many of these decision tree points where they break off and you can make correct decision after correct decision for so long. But then the longer the game gets, the more complicated and the stakes also rise for those individual decisions. So, of course, every analyst is always looking at these individual moments. And because there are different biases, there are different backgrounds that people are coming from, they can also have different weights on which of those is correct, because it's not black and white 100% to 0. You're gaining 60% of the advantage as you would have with another decision. But it's very difficult to concept to describe without having something in front of you to point to. Like describing it as an abstract concept is like Well, what's smarter? You know?
So I'm looking at this, and one of the things that I think is true is the early game teams can be a lot better then because you can replicate that situation a lot more, right? Like you can say the first 3 minutes of almost every game, you can pretty much replay over and over in scrims if you need to. But the 23rd minute, by at that point, because all these trees have unfolded at this point, mistakes have been made, mistakes have not been made. You can't replicate the decision making of whether to go for a dragon or set up around a baron at the 23-minute mark without some like sandbox that lets you just replay over and over. And so like when you are watching these teams, what you see is they hit these parts, and the stall usually happens, as you say. The first ring of turrets, super easy. First dragon, super easy. First couple rift heralds, easy. It's when they have to start pushing into that second ring of turrets and start setting up around baron, start prepping for like the third and the fourth dragon, that things start getting really complicated. How do you actually, like, it's one thing for us to say, yeah, you just they got to be better at setting up around baron, but that seems like something that is, I think, at least to us, like to me, is easier said than done. Like, how do you actually get to the point where you can practice that and actually become better at that phase of the game?
I mean, we, like you said, we don't have a sandbox, so you have to play more games, to that point to be able to practice that. But theoretically, you lay down. These are the strengths of the champions on both sides, and this goes into identifying whatever your win conditions for whatever champ select you've come out of, which should be done at the very beginning. And so you get to theoretically lay your game plan for how you want to execute in a perfect world, blue sky towards the 30-minute mark. How much side lane pressure have you drafted? If you've been able to get something like a Kale and the other team has Ornn and Karma mid or something like that, which is an example from some LCK or LCK or LPL game that I was just doing a broad review on that I can't remember. You obviously have this huge advantage, and just due to the strength of the champion, that's ideal world. Different things can come out of the early game and different plays can be made. But that's kind of what you have to lay down as your game plan approaching those late stages, because like you're talking about, we don't have the practice tools to actually go after that. But you basically judge this, which win conditions can your champions go after compared to your opponents.
I feel like that's the thing I see come up a lot when I'm watching teams is it feels like they don't quite, I don't know if understand the win condition is the right word. I feel like if you step back in the game and you throw and we're going to pause it for 5 minutes and I pluck any player out of the game and you ask them, what's the win condition for both teams in these games? I bet you almost every pro would actually be able to answer that correctly even. But I think the failure comes in terms of when they're in the heat of the moment. It seems like the bigger picture often escapes them, where it feels to me like a lot of times you see teams, they shot called towards winning like an objective or being around an objective versus understanding how that plays into the bigger picture. So they'll understand that like, hey, Baron's really important right now, but that kind of ends up overshadowing what they need to do to win the game. And I'm thinking about the G2 versus SKT semifinals matchup where G2 took, I think, one Baron the entire series. That to me was a great example of understanding win conditions in terms of this is what we need to do to win. Baron wasn't necessarily part of that. And I think a lot of times teams get trapped in this like, oh, Baron is a good thing to take, right? So we should set up around here. And
I really like that example too, because I remember doing a analyst desk segment on G2 afterwards, how when we turn off the fog of war, it's so easy for us to view this game plan and like see it coming and you get all excited. But turning it back on and doing the analyst desk segment with fog of war from the opponent's point of view, it really highlighted how G2 made the macro decision that was most unexpected. Like I just remember them circling back around through the blue quadrant of the jungle to re-dive on this weak side, and you're just like, why would you do that rather than have the perfect setup around Baron? And yet they re-dive the tower, they push it ahead, they get like secondary turret instead, and then they can retreat back to the neutral ground to be able to take it and have a bigger advantage. And you're just like, seeing it from that point of view, with the other side of the information, just makes all the difference.
It's kind of like when we're watching horror movies, right? Where
Mm.
from our perspective, we see like we're screaming at a character who's like, "Oh, I'm gonna open this door to go into this basement." And we're like, "Oh, you're dumbass! Why?" But we have all that information. We know, one, that this is a freaking horror movie, and two, we watched like 3 people die in that basement 2 minutes ago. And I think that's a really good point you bring up about how that fog of war kind of works in that same way, where we as spectators sit there and we can say, "Oh, wow, like." You guys are dumbasses. How could you not have properly set up for this fight? But that's because we see everything, right? And I think that's one of those things that becomes a lot more interesting when you're able to look back at the fog of war and see what kind of information you do or
Yeah.
you don't have.
This reminds me, I was watching one of Travis's interviews with Zazel from this last weekend, and Zazel has always been one of the best spoken, most articulate players that has a real mind for the strategy and the macro. And he started talking about how his role on EG is different than what it used to be on Cloud9.
Mm-hmm.
And Cloud9, he was focusing so much on being the engaged and setting up and being a big part of starting fights and his mechanics for that squad, because they had a more complete kind of agreement and understanding of their macro style and what they want to go after. And how on EG he has more fully embraced controlling the map, keeping track of all the opponents, and helping the rest of the members and advising them with positioning for macro, which was really interesting to me, because he also kind of let it slip when he was talking about current Cloud9. He was like, they all have this same understanding. Like, they don't really need anyone to tell anyone else on the team macro, because they all have good individual understandings of it, and they're all of the same opinion.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, okay, so you're saying EG doesn't have that, and you're the one doing it. And I just thought it was really interesting whenever he talks about these things with the different teams,
Yeah.
and how he was a little bit surprised and disappointed in himself that he got caught out one time where he's focusing so much on tracking all the enemy team and where they should be setting up for the next minute for objectives and stuff like that. And losing control or losing track for just a moment can mean a death.
I mean, it's extremely stressful. I'm sure you've been in the situation where you have been pulled into one of your group of friends and you are by far the best player in the lobby, even like, and then your friends would say they're silver, they're gold. And what ends up happening throughout games like this is you start to fall behind a little bit. And because you're the best player in the lobby, you feel this onus to kind of shot call and tell them, okay, this is, and a lot of times, at least from my experience, when I have to do this, it's always something stupid like, okay, guys, let's just group mid. We're gonna get mid prio, and we're gonna put some wards by Baron. It's always like
we gotta reduce this down to the simplest form.
It's easy, like it's simple chat calling, but it's still, I think, really stressful when I have to do it. Like I feel exhausted after I play those games, where sometimes I just want to go into solo queue and you just want to turn your brain off a little bit, pump up some music, and just do stupid shit. And you see with pro players, in this particular example, like I think one of my immediate responses would be, that's crazy that pro players would not know where to be at any given time. But I think you have to remember that you can be extremely good at this game without having any real understanding of macro concepts on the map. Like there are plenty of players who've climbed to the highest elos and just do stupid, baffling stuff over and over. The Shy is a very good example of a player who is so singularly good at winning these mechanical fights, but sometimes he'll do something on the map that you just, wow, like what in the world did you just do? And so I think that's a really cool thing for Zazel to bring up, that you have to remember when you see players in the wrong spots. It's like, yeah, like that's to be expected. They're not all going to have this like big brain for the game.
Yeah, and that's one of the things why we always get this question on every once in a while on the dive. Should you allow teams to have a coach in comms during the game? And I always reply with no, because I don't want to lose this factor where we do have some players that are just so highly valued for that strategic in-game shot calling, and the IGL term, in-game leader, that comes a lot from like CS:GO and games like that. I think is really valuable,
Yeah.
and it's another interesting part of the game that you do have to balance when you're forming a team. And I just think it gets highlighted so many times, and it leads to a lot of exciting moments in competitive League of Legends at the very highest levels as
Yeah.
well. And that's what can lead to things like base races, where both teams think that they have the better end of this decision, and you just play it out and you race for it, and it's just so exciting.
Yeah, I mean, it's like shot calling is one of those like intangibles that I think is really hard to quantify. And over the years, you've had people say like, "Oh, X is really good at shot calling because their team looks good," or we
I
hear
mean, you're
comms.
related to one.
Yeah.
Hi.
So highs, and of course we got the show match coming up this week where we get to see that shot calling in action again. But for me, like highs a good example actually of what I'm trying to say here is somebody where I feel like on some levels his shot calling was actually overrated. I felt like honestly I actually thought like especially in NA his mechanics were underrated and his shot calling was overrated in the sense that if you actually got to listen on some of those comms that would come out every now and then. Sometimes like and anybody who's been a Cloud9 fan or has watched a lot of the games, and I watched every single Cloud9 game and every single game High's been on, he has made a ton of terrible calls in terms of like setting up for Baron. There's been a lot of just absolutely desperate calls. High strength was not necessarily making the right call, it was being decisive in making a call. And I think that's something like that's another facet of being a good shot caller is you can't have like indecision. Like when you make a call, you can't be like, oh, I guess we could set up at Baron and maybe if they come, we can turn. But you know,
Zazel specifically mentioned being proactive in LCS games as one of the things. He was like, okay, in scrims, we have this really refined play style and are really good at executing it. But in the LCS, he was lamenting that they had so many moments where he would look back at the game and see them just waiting to see what would unfold, waiting to see what would happen. Whereas in scrims, he's always laying out the next steps and being proactive. And that's what you're referring to is being decisive and having the game plan in place before the situation arises where, your opponent gets to take the first move. I honestly think initiative in League of Legends is a huge benefit and is a huge
massive
concept that is kind of lost in some of the terminology that has just people start to use more buzzwords and just kind of latch on to certain terms, and then when certain terms get repeated, they are applied in different ways because different people have different interpretations of what it even means. And you get these super simple terms that they're like macro. It just encompasses anything beyond what you're controlling your individual character as, and there are just so many nuances that are always lost there.
Anytime you see like a top-rated comment on Reddit, as soon as you see the buzzwords in that top-rated comment on like a thread, it's done. Kill the word. It's over. It's lost all meaning at that point.
Yeah. I really like the high point that you're bringing up though, because I just remember being so close to it as well. All of the teammates on Cloud9 just turned that into an instant meme, and they're like, what? How is this a big story? And for you to be like, his shot calling was overrated, it had to be overrated. It was rated as like the god mode, king all-seeing eye or something like that, as everyone was like, oh my god, they're shot calling, it's just insane. And so then Medios and Sneaky and everybody were just got to the point where they'd be streaming, they'd be like, shot call, just like while someone's in a fight, like in a 1v1 duel, they're like, help, shot call me. What ability do I use on him? And everyone's getting to the point where like, does he actually tell them like each key press?
Yeah. I mean, it got really funny, all the memes around it. But I don't want to take credit away from him because I feel like when I say it's overrated, he was still probably the best shot caller in the league. But it was always, it definitely got to the point where it was almost like people treated him as like some shot calling Jesus or whatever. And then like that was the only reason he was good. And people forget that he was like easily the second best mid laner mechanically behind Bjergsen for most of his tenure on Cloud9. And I feel like that's why they won. Like that same Cloud9 team back then, they won because they won lane. And then if you are winning lanes, it's a lot easier to make calls, right? Like you have 3 winning lanes, you go set up around Baron, you win any fight you take.
Winning lanes and being decisive, that gets you pretty far.
I mean, that's
Legends,
a good formula for success, if you will.
But I have played with High in like rank flex and stuff like that too, and been in his like in being in his shot calling is kind of a weird term, but that's what it feels like. I did like he would be like, all right, after wolves, you go here, like we're going mid or we're diving or we're going bottom or something like that. And I had never even when playing, way back in the day with CLG and stuff, it never got to that point where it was that specific.
Yeah.
And it almost took away a lot of me even playing the game as there was just so much laid out for me that I felt like I had a duty, to follow this checklist and be here and do this and
Yeah.
get to that next point. And it
You
was,
don't even have time to think if it's the right, like what he's telling you
yeah.
is the right thing to do. It just sounds right. Like he's very good at sounding right when he's making calls like that. I think a lot of this,
and also he's challenger, and I was like, oh, okay, so I'm like D1 master.
Yeah.
Like he probably is right. So
Probably.
in my position, I was very easily able to like put aside any ego and just be like, yes, sir, okay,
Yeah. This stems back. Did you play World of Warcraft arena match back in the day?
I did. Yeah.
Okay, so if you remember Arena, so me and I used to play WoW Arena like all the time. This was
Okay,
like
twos or threes.
Yeah, the two we did both. Our twos team was so I was a paladin, he was a warrior, and so it was like during Burning Crusade. If I spec'd Holy, we would have been unstoppable. But because I'm older than him, I refused to heal him. So I refused to spec Holy. So we were just running this Ret Pally MS warrior. Like our whole strategy was just insta-kill one person.
Yeah.
And if we didn't kill him within the first 30 seconds, we would just lose. We actually ended up doing pretty well. Just climbing just by literally just gimping people like that.
Mm-hmm.
But the point of WoW Arena is you have to call out literally every single timer if you're trying to play properly. And you would have to know at the time, I think it was 8-9 classes worth of stuff. And you would have to sit there and call out, and you would start marking them. So you'd mark every single thing you'd see with like a diamond, a triangle, and you would call out, that's 3 seconds left. We know there's 12 seconds left before they can stun again. And you would just have to know every single big ability. And if you didn't know, like our whole comp was, we have to know those timers because we have to spike and burst them.
You have to get around their defensives.
Yeah, there's tiny windows you have to be able to burst through. And I feel like that's kind of where some of the calling came up. Like he's always been very vocal. But my point, like I said, my main point was, if you go back and watch some and you actually analyze some of the calls, was it the right call? I think you'd find a lot more. I think you would throw a little more doubt into it if you went back and looked at them. But they a lot of times ended up working out because the old adage with League of Legends is it's better for 5 people to make the same stupid call versus being half in, half out kind of thing, right? And I think that's what that plagues a lot of teams even today.
And it's certainly more fun to watch.
Way more fun to watch.
Because even if it is going to turn out into a disaster, it's going to be fun to watch.
And I mean, that's what made that old Cloud9 team so special, was they would be on the same page over and over, and just they'd put themselves in a lot of crazy situations. I think it's like it's the manifestation of Double Lift basically playing Vayne, where he, like, the whole idea was throw him in a side lane and let him play himself out of those stupid situations, right?
Now, something else that Zazo brought up in his interview was talking about current Cloud9 and them internationally. Mm-hmm. And man, I was so sad that, we didn't have MSI. We didn't get to see them internationally, both because I'm super curious, but also for North America, we just get trash talk all the time. And I really just want them to.
I feel like they would have ended some of that trash talking.
Yeah. But Zazo brought up some of the points of like, okay, so I need to see some data on if they don't win all 3 lanes, if they don't win mid jungle and can move mid jungle to side lanes that early on.
So actually, I want to press back on that real quick. Do you actually agree with that assessment that Cloud9 just always wins lane? Because one of the things that came up to me immediately is we've seen Licorice get killed in solo lane a couple times so far this split.
So on the Licorice point, he has been solo killed. In all of those situations that I remember, he was already ahead in CS from pushing up and was able to either teleport back with Blabber protecting so that he wouldn't get like redove, or he had the minion wave in an okay spot when he died. So those are 2 important things to me. And yes, you do not want to get solo killed in any situation. But I think it is also important because there are such big differences between I've built up this giant wave, we dive the top laner, we get the kill and deny a whole bunch of stuff. or those other types of situations where Blabber got a bunch done elsewhere. He did die, but was able to keep up farm and stuff like that.
Yeah, I guess the distinction I just wanted to make when he says that they naturally win all three lanes, I don't think they naturally win all three lanes. I think that they do win the lane phase over and over, but I don't think it's naturally like, oh, they're all solo killing their opponents at like 4 minutes, 5 minutes.
Yeah.
Like they're winning lane phase because of specifically of what Blabber and Niski are able to do on the map. And so definitely they're always winning lane phase, but I think it's important to point out that it's not because of individual talent. And I think that's actually a pretty key distinction as you shift into international play.
Yeah, I also wanted to point out that they don't even always win the first 2v2 with Blabber and Niski.
Yeah.
They certainly versus TSM in spring, the game where Bjergsen was on Renekton. Blabber goes in, they go for the 2v2, they both die. And I remember Niski being on Kiana and having to give up so many minions to join Blabber in doing that. And I was like, oh my goodness, he's going to be tilted. He balled, but they were not tilted after, the first death or the first failure, and they stuck to the game plan. They just returned to the game plan and continue to try and find openings to apply pressure to roam across the map. And that is not the only time that Blabber has died early. The team memes on it as well, as far as he's first in every single stat for the LCS, including inting first. And that is a bit of a meme, but I think it's important also to recognize that they have had some stumbles, some failures in parts of their early game. It's just that they quickly right it, and they continue to look for a lot of those fights and those opportunities, even if they are at an early deficit. That being said, those types of things are exactly what Zeyzal's talking about, getting punished and then not being able to come back from at international competition if you're playing rank 1, rank 2, LPL style teams. So that is the main thing that people are kind of looking for and trying to shore up and really finish Cloud9 as a final product that we can send off to international competition and really get that victory.
Yeah, I agree for sure. I think that's the part where once we hit these, I mean, that's always been the plague for NA teams in the past. Like all our best NA teams, they go and they aren't quite able to pull out of that early hole. Like I think TSM is another really good example of a team who in NA, when they were on top, was, hey, they were very good. If you got to a 30-minute mark and you were even gold against TSM, you were boned. They were just going to outplay you in team fights. We saw sparks of this even on international level. Team Liquid, another similar type of mold team, where when we got to see them team fight, they were very good at it, even on international level. It's just they rarely were able to get there on even footing. And I think that's what makes this Cloud9 team exciting, is that it kind of feels like they can get there on even footing. And one of the things that you talked about earlier was this idea of being proactive. One thing I've been meaning to do this, and maybe I'll do it this weekend, but I'd be curious, because I don't think this is a stat we actually record. I don't know if there's an easy way to record it. But before objectives, what happens is you should look for like, let's say there's 2 minutes left on Dragon. If you're a spectator, one thing you should start looking at is when do teams start backing in order to refresh wards, buy items, and then get back into position so they can start setting up for objectives. And I think that there's got to be a window in there that's like, this is the perfect time that you have to go back and reset. Like 1 minute and 30 might be too fast. 45 minutes or 45 seconds might be too slow. And I feel like that's the kind of window I'd be curious to look at and examine a little bit more. Is there actually a perfect window with when you have to go back and properly set up? And I feel like Cloud9, better than any other team, is able to set up on time around these objectives so that they're not, you don't see them stumbling in late and trying to contest a dragon that the other team has already kind of postured around. And I think that's a thing I would be curious to actually take some data on.
So I always used to try and dive into whatever I could measure in League of Legends when trying to figure out jungle routes or objectives or anything like that. And I did timings from fountain out to different spots on the map. And for the longer lane on bottom side, I don't remember the exact numbers, but it was per boot level. It was like 30 seconds for most champions, because champions also have different base move speeds. with no boots, and then up to mobility boots was like 23, something like that.
Yeah.
Low 20s for different amounts. And so I would kind of use that for when I last saw the enemy jungler, or when you saw someone actually complete a recall, as this window of, that they just went back, even if they do the fastest purchase and they somehow have some crazy move speed, you have at least 20 something seconds to be able to go place your wards, or go accomplish X objective. So I usually give it like, and in solo queue teams, you want to give them a bit of a buffer as well. But you want to have people at least have 30 seconds to be able to drop what they're doing and get set up done in time. I would usually say significantly more than that, because setting up usually implies that you don't already have existing control wards, and you want to be able to get there, plus be able to place them, clean out enemy vision and stuff like that. So
I mean, you just see a lot of teams, like you'll see their like an AD carry go grab an extra wave, and an extra wave is going to cost you another 15 seconds if you're coming down there. And I think a lot of times that's the difference between making it and being in the right spot, or not being in the right spot, and that can dictate the entire pace of the game. For you, like, this is actually something, because I don't actually think about this much when I'm playing. I'm one of those. I climb because I can just outplay people. Sometimes I have never done this number crunching thing, but as a jungler, you kind of have to know these timings a bit more. Let's say soul point's about to come up. You're a jungler. We have to take this dragon. At what point do you generally back and try and come back to set up and like tell your team that you have to do this? Do you feel like
I usually do a minute and a half, because you need a lot of setup, like I was talking about, trying to clear out the different places before the objective is there. If the enemy team already has pixel brush or something like that, and they've got CC, so I generally want to give at least a minute and a half for solo queue games to have time for people to get their control wards and get over there, so you can have positioning.
Yeah, then the ideal
again is going to depend so much on team comps and stuff.
So I mean, the ideal setup then, right, is that you set up wards as deep in their jungle as possible. Let's say you're going for dragon and you're on blue side. Ideally, you set up wards like towards their blue buff, towards the little bush by mid tower, and then you actually control the river with your champions, right? And I think what happens is you see a lot of teams, they'll push, like they don't quite get to the river even, and so they have to use as soon as you see a team having to use wards to actually peek into the river, they've already lost the positioning for me, because the other team at that point could be in the river, and it feels like that's too slow, right? If you are coming back and your first move is to ward into the river, you're too slow to the punch. And I feel like that's something Cloud9 is very good at doing, is they're able to take that river a lot better than other teams. It's I mean, it's literally the difference between, like, what is it, like 600 units, like how wide the river is. But that 600 units is the difference between being able to win the fight or being on the right side of a choke point or not. And I feel like that is a thing that when you were talking about mid-game macro, that like Cloud9 excels at this. This is what makes Cloud9 special to me, more so than early game or whatever, is their ability to just properly set up around these objectives. They're so fast to it.
Yeah, one of the biggest things in League of Legends at all levels is tracking your opponents and tracking what your opponent's goal is to do. And the more accurately you can track that, and the more information you can get, which a lot comes from trying to get deep wards, makes the game just so much easier to play. Even though I know this on an intellectual level, still in solo queue to this day, there are so many moments where you get hyped up into a fight, and I'm invading, I'm Olaf, and I'm like, yeah, I can definitely beat this guy. And then, oh, why is the enemy support here? And you see that so many times where your laner gets ganked, or some unexpected enemy champion shows up, turns the tides of what someone thought was a winning duel, and they just get angry, and they're just, why is your laner here? Why is your this is your responsibility. You should have told me. And that's just such a big thing, trying to track these positionings and getting a feel for the timings of people moving around the map. So that's why I give it so much of a buffer. Pro play, you probably need like half this time I'm talking about for setups and stuff, or just immediately go here. But I think in solo queue, the more time, the better.
Yeah, and it's also not a uniform thing where you need like all 5 members to back at like the 115-minute mark. You just because you can stagger it, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
some people can come in a little bit later, some people need to be there a little bit earlier. But that's something that I think is useful to watch. And anybody, like if you're really trying to watch your team this weekend, just kind of watch their back timings before the first like dragon, before a Rift Herald,
Yeah.
Baron's coming up. But those are always just really interesting timings to watch, because I think if you wait to watch them coming into the river, it's literally too late. You should be able to tell who's going to get there first just based on the previous back timing.
Yeah. At Worlds, I kept bringing up, I know for a few games in a row, I was like, okay, even a recall back to base is an objective. And I'm trying to like classify each thing in the game as objectives because so many more have been added to the game. And it's one of the reasons why the game has progressed to the current state where aggressive play and proactive play is so heavily rewarded. There are turret plates now, there are multiple Rift Heralds, Dragon Souls, all Scuttle Crabs. There are so many more things on the map, more objectives for you to take. And that really incentivizes being proactive and playing off your power spikes. Again, as everyone who's played this game knows, gold doesn't actually mean anything. It doesn't mean your team is winning unless you went back and spent your gold.
Yeah.
Got an item to use with that gold. It's something that a lot of people kind of lose track of when they're watching competitive games with the scoreboard at the top, especially.
Yeah.
Like, this team is way ahead. And, well, the other team got the mini objective of getting their recalls off before the fight. Now he's got a death cap. You've got 2,000 gold in your inventory, but that is not going to help you in this fight.
You're really calling out those like Warwick junglers that like it's like level 9. It's literally their first back. They ping their gold. I'm just sitting there. I was like, Or those like Sona players in ARAM who just never die. They're like 1, 0, and 15, and they have 6,000 gold in their inventory. And it's always like, oh, I was like, what? It's like, come on, guys, like use your gold. It's not something to be proud of. Go use your gold.
It is a good gloating tool, though. It's like, I'm doing so well that I haven't had to go back. Yeah.
I mean, I've definitely been there, but usually it's like after you get like a pentakill on a fight, you get Baron, then you ping how much gold you have. But like even some of those times, like those fights will happen when I'm already sitting on 1,500 gold. It's one of those types of games where you're so far ahead that you're just trying to milk every kill you can get, or you're like capping the same bush trying to punish top laner. Like I think those are times where it's funny, but and again, to your point, use the gold if you're trying to win, One thing I was kind of curious about, we've been talking about the Cloud9 playstyle, and this guy actually got me thinking in terms of being proactive to fights. One of the things that has been like people accept this as fact nowadays is you have to play fast-paced. Like that's just the best way to play the game, because we've seen G2 dominate with it. We've seen the LPL win back-to-back worlds with it. We've seen the LCK completely fall off the cliff the last 2 years. Got me thinking with the debate in the LCS we have Cloud9's play style, and then we have Flyquest, I think, being the other extreme at the moment. That's still successful. Is Flyquest's play style actually dead? And this is something that you're going to get a lot of LCK pundits that will really be like, like really think about this. But I was thinking about it some more. I don't know if it's actually true that the fast-paced style is the best way to play League of Legends, or rather the only way to play League of Legends. It just happens to be the play style that has won the last couple of years. Sample size is still small enough where that doesn't mean that's true. Like KT was only a game away from beating IG that 1 year. SKT very easily could have won Worlds last year if things had flipped in their favor. They weren't that much worse than the other teams. Is the slow style dead?
So it's definitely not dead. As clearly demonstrated across the world, there are still plenty of teams that can play scaling. I think the aggressive style has been proven to have a much higher peak, and no style is really going to be dead if you can max it out and your other styles are at a 50% level of that. So you should be playing whatever is your best overall. But I really think there's a lot of evidence pointing towards this proactive, more aggressive, rotating around through the map to multiply your advantages as being the highest peak level of League of Legends. And peak level of League of Legends has not been hit. No team does not make any mistakes. No team plays flawlessly aggressive. And part of it is because not only do you have to be perfect mechanically, there are all these decision trees that we talk about popping up at every moment. But I really think that's the way the game should be designed, where the peak is to be the generator of pressure, to be the one coming up, and posing questions to your opponent team to try and solve. That being said, trying to minimize risk and playing defensively is very much a viable strategy. As we've seen, with there being a lot of neutral objectives, you can also have this tankier, slower, more defensive 5-on-5 setup, and then try and go to the objective, try and get your opponent to run into you.
Mm-hmm.
But one of the big differences, and I think something people forget a lot when looking back at the old LCK era of dominance, how they ruled League of Legends for so long, never lost. One of the biggest changes was a reduction in vision. There were so many more wards. You could buy green wards. You could blanket the map in vision, and intelligence is the best defense. Having more information on your opponents. If you see Blabber going for each of his moves, if you see Niski going for each rotation, yes, maybe they are better players, but you can prepare your defense a lot easier having that blanket of vision. And that's something that people always talk about Samsung White and previous iterations of SKT doing so well. But that strategy, large parts were literally removed from the game, removing defense options, removing these early alert systems. And that might be one of the biggest contributors, in addition to adding more of these early game objectives for people to fight over and more possible rewards.
So when you're looking at a team like Flyquest, then you almost have to start making more educated guesses as to where to defend. Like, I think in theory, for how Flyquest beats Cloud9, is the recipe is simple, very simple in theory. Is you pick a scaling comp and then you survive until you outscale them. It's like, in theory, that is how you would beat Cloud9. There isn't any magical ins and outs about it. Cloud9, I'm sure, could be very good at split pushing. We haven't really seen them have to go to that like 3-1-1 style very often. They're just been very good at just kind of breaking you down as a moving ball of death once they start going. If you're a Flyquest, though, you're sitting here, and let's say I'm a Flyquest fan. I'm sitting here, I'm saying, Kobe, all these analysts are saying that Flyquest has no shot. Cloud9 is going to win. I want you, though, because you're the analyst. Like, what does Flyquest actually need to perfect and do super well in order to beat Cloud9, or is it actually doomed?
Beat the mid jungle duo. I think if you take out the ones that are rotating through the map, the biggest difficulty has been them moving this advantage to Licorice and camping Licorice, or to the bottom lane, so they can control dragons. And
so who do you attack in that situation?
Like, so I think until we have a team, until we have a team that definitively stops and defeats the Niski Blabber roaming and moving through objectives, that we don't see repeat victories. And again, there were a couple times where they did fail the early skirmish, or they did fail at one point.
I mean, at that point, because you can set up a lot of this early game, and we were talking about this earlier, that you can create a lot more strategy and execute on it on the early game. Do you focus on Niski in this combo and like, oh, we're going to camp mid? Or do you pick something that lets you invade Blabber over and over, and then you set up deep wards and you track Blabber over and over, and then you counter gank him when he goes gank? Is it
way easier to pin down a mid laner than it is to pin down a jungler, in my experience? So I would definitely try and target Niski, also because there's a continued stream of a resource, which is mid lane minion waves, which solo experience for minions has been buffed as well, and is even more valuable of a resource than in previous iterations. So I think that's where you attack, is kind of the heart of the problem. Will Niski then just not go back to lane after that? Who's to say?
Be careful what you wish for. It's like the
Who's
old
to say?
what was it when that Sona top was in meta for a little bit? You would camp it early, and then it just wouldn't come back to lane for 15 minutes, and then suddenly you would be losing. No.
Yeah, there's a really famous top lane Lee Sin player, Blem, who
Oh,
played
Blem,
in
yeah,
North
yeah,
America for a very long time. Yeah, you probably know him. He's
yeah.
been playing for a very long time as well. And people would you just always complain like, oh, we like killed him like 2-3 times in lane. All of a sudden he's just bottom lane now. He's just roaming, and then somehow he ends up winning these games and he gets challenger. It's kind of a similar idea of a lot of top lane Rangars. If you try and crush your lane, you try and be super aggressive early. Oh, you got killed. All right, I guess I'm just roaming now. I'm ulting somewhere else on the map. But that mobility across the map, and it's even more effective in solo queue because you get the extra surprise factor. But I think going out of your lane and roaming around at the correct timings is one of the biggest advantages and discrepancies in League of Legends.
Yeah, for
And
sure.
I kind of like in your 10 thoughts when you're talking about Golden Guardians being Cloud9 Junior. I actually want there to be more juniors to try that style. I want us to have some more test tubes ready to try and grow some more of these. That's why when they signed Demonte and they were like, all right, we're committing to closers, carry champions. Demonte is going to play TF, Galio, all these roaming mid laners. He's going to try and play melee champions to be aggressive and create plays. Great.
Yeah.
Let's see more of them.
I 100% agree with that. My qualm with that, and I mentioned this, and I've talked about this previously in the past. I feel like I hit on this topic at least once a year, which is, and correct me if you can come up with an example. I just feel like we don't historically have any, like literally any examples of a team as a 5-man unit without switching out anybody on the roster that started off like even mediocre and then became like a historically great team. I think literally every single team that has won Worlds or has been a contender to win Worlds, and even the most historically dominant LCS teams of all time, and you can, let's use LCS for example, or OG Cloud9, the Less Boy edition of TSM, the double lift version of Team Liquid. All of these teams were dominant off of the bat. Just there was never a period where we're like, oh, this team, hope they get better eventually. They were just all dominant off the bat. Every world champion, dominant off the bat. There have been individual players who started off poorly, but then kind of found different situations or what have you that let them kind of shine. But as teams, though, and this is what worries me when I'm trying to assess teams in terms of, hey, how will this team evolve? And if I'm a GM, this is also a thing that would be at the forefront of my mind, is there's just no examples actually of a team starting off mediocre and then becoming dominant. Definitely tons of examples of teams getting better, but I can't think of very many.
I feel like Samsung, not Samsung White, when the next few years when
with Crown and like Ambition.
Yeah. I feel like they had a bit of a build-up period for me. And I'm trying to think of other versions as well, and you're talking about like individual player changes and things like that.
It's almost always been like at least like one player comes in and then things completely change. And I'm sure if you can come up with good examples, leave them in the comments. Tell me I'm a dumbass, whatever you have to say. But that's always been one of my things as I'm analyzing is if you're not immediately dominant off the bat, I have a lot of trouble believing in your ability to eventually say go to Worlds and really make a splash there. Yeah. And that's just something I like seeing teams have these extra players that they're pulling in and out of the bench, because sometimes it takes and we've talked about this earlier in the split with like Cloud9 was 5 players who nobody expected them to be this dominant when you looked at them individually before you put them together, and you can theoretically take another 5 guys who are good and put them together and something just clicks, and suddenly they're the Power Rangers, they form Megazord and they blast everybody. And that's the thing.
I feel like Megazord's a bad guy. No, the Power Rangers forming Megazord, maybe that's a good thing. I don't know. Keep going. It sounds like an evil name.
It does sound like an evil name, but the Megazord is
okay.
I mean, I guess it could be evil if the Power Rangers were evil, but it's a mechanism for
Okay,
which
okay.
they, it's a robot. It has no sentience. But
Got it.
the thing is, I'm looking at Cloud9 Junior. Off the bat, there's some promise, but there are very clearly issues with it. And a lot of times when these issues aren't they're often not like mechanically related things. They're often tied to, hey, this team just is actually not very good at the mid stage of the game. They don't know how to get to objectives on time. They play their win conditions out poorly. And that feels like a thing that you either can do it off the bat or you can't. Like, it's like, that seems a lot harder to implement onto a team as a group of 5. I hope to be proved wrong in terms of, and I think that's the whole point of teams playing the games, is that they think that I'm wrong, and so they are always going to work to get better. I just find that when you look at the samples in history, kind of support this take that I'm going to throw out there.
So one of my things with that is people don't start paying as close attention to teams until they start to have these skyrocket performances also. So I feel like there's definitely going to be some examples, and it's like, well, nobody really paid attention until they started dominating this, and so you don't like remember some of the struggles. But I was like, okay, well, FPX, Doing B was talked about so much, and everybody always had they're like, oh my god, he's the greatest player not to make worlds, and people did make fun of his style, but it wasn't until they actually added Kien and Chris to the team that they finally, boom, now they're actually winning all the things. And then I was like, oh, well, maybe I think IG would probably be a good example until, and I was like, well,
Jackie Love.
It does feel like everybody's making, makes one little adjustment that pushes them over the edge, but I really gotta believe in an improvement, and I really gotta believe that maybe there's this like cap or something, but I've definitely seen improvements in teams, so like you could definitely get better, but maybe your point is like you need to have the Tetris configuration in place of the players and have this synergy and look for improvements as
100%,
well.
100% you can get better. Just that, if you are against a team that was also really good to begin with, that's the thing, right? Is people are saying, oh yeah, TSM's getting better this split, Team Liquid's getting better this split, but I don't know if they're getting better at the same rate Cloud9 is still getting better. It's not like Cloud9 is this stagnant pool of water that is just not improving as the rest of the league catches up to them. This isn't like a video game where Cloud9 is constantly at level 72 and you just got to go into the mountains and train until you're...
Is it not harder for Cloud9 to improve when they just stomp everybody?
So in theory, I think that makes sense when somebody would suggest that, but I don't know if that's actually true. Like, in terms of like, is there actually a cap for when you can get, like, is it actually harder? Are they actually approaching the limit? Because we were literally just talking about the thing that makes League of Legends so awesome is the cap for being good at this game and being quote unquote perfect seems so out of reach that I feel like maybe that's not, like, definitely they're probably improving at a lower pace or a slower pace, but it's not like they're not improving. And I would also put that claim to.
So I would say I do agree with the steel sharpens steel, and there is a point where you do need a team to defeat you at what you're doing now to push you to the next level and pose that next question. Zeyzal, and that's what he was talking about in his interview, where he's like, well, nobody beats their mid jungle, so they win all 3 lanes, then their mid jungle moves through and they win the whole map. So I need to see when a team defeats them at question A before you can answer, does Cloud9 have it to elevate to question B and solve question B with the correct answer?
I think I would. I mean, we're not going to see that until an international event is kind of how it feels like at this point. But that's, and the main reason I'm saying this is not to really flame the other 9 teams, because I feel like the majority of teams are just, that's just how competition works. Is the majority of teams are not going to be world class. The whole point of being world class and historically dominant is there's only a handful at any given time in any given era. And Cloud9 is exciting because they feel like they can be that one team that is dominant. Like, and again, I use Cloud9 because I use this LCS example because I have a much stronger memory of LCS teams and how they began. And you can look at all of our champions in the LCS, and without fail, every single dominant stretch of team, and this being the initial Cloud9 run, they were dominant off the bat, no questions asked. Boy TSM, summer 2016, dominant off the bat. Team Liquid with Double Lift, a little more questionable in terms of what dominance looks like. They had some rougher splits, but they did win 4 titles in a row. I would say 4 titles in a row classifies them as a dominant team, and they did it as they came together, right? There wasn't any, I think the one maybe exception that I can think of, and even them, is 2015 Summer CLG. And even then, I don't actually think that was a roster that stuck together. I think that was that not the lone split Pobelter played for them? And
yeah, Pobelter only like one of the half ones.
Yeah, and I feel like that. So even then, I don't, at least in NA, have a great example for you of a team that was able to literally win the LCS, that had gone through a period of struggle. They were the second place team, the third place team, and then they stuck together and overcame their demons the next time around. We just don't have that example. And this is maybe my results-based analysis of it, but that's kind of where I'm at right now, is until you can show me examples of a team really coming together and improving, I am gonna believe that's a nice little thing they tell you so that you can really give it your all. But
you're still waiting for the last piece to be changed, and it may well just be a single player change or something like that, as we've seen multiple times. But
it could be a coach sometimes as well. I think you see that in sports a lot, is a coach comes in and takes a team. I'm thinking one of my favorite teams, Detroit Pistons team, they replaced Rick Carlisle with Larry Brown way back in the early 2000s, immediately won a championship. So it could be something as simple as that. And in the LCS, it could be maybe some management changes to change up the environment. There's a lot of different little things that just gives a cultural reset, or a reset to how your team approaches the game.
So you're saying change at least one thing every split, if just for luck.
Yeah. If you don't win, that is my...
Give me a tweak.
Yeah. If any teams out there ever want to interview me for a GM position, that is my pitch to you. Is
I like it.
This is what they tell teachers too, is the first day of class when you walk in, is you should move one thing in the room just to assert dominance. Like I control this space. And that would be my GM move, is come in and be like, look at me.
From now on, when I go into a big meeting, I'm going to move something.
People, or you close the blinds, you're like, why don't we just pull up this projector here? Let's turn off this light. It's like,
this is a good tip. All right,
here is somebody who is control of the situation.
I like it.
Yeah, maybe don't do it in like an interview though. Like you walk into you're being interviewed, you walk into their office, you move their plant, but then I don't know, maybe they would respect that.
This is a real go-getter here. Yeah, that plant.
It's like, I hated that plant. How do you know?
We got some exciting stuff coming up though. We might as well touch on the show match for C9 TSM that's going to come up this weekend as our last little touch here, because again, we're both boomers. Yes. You're related to High. You've got some personal investment in this. How do you feel about the show match coming up?
Okay, so here's my other hot take: is if you put that Cloud9 roster back together right now, they would finish top 6 in the LCS.
Ooh.
Not in the sense of how good they are right now, but if you gave them 2 months to practice again, I bet you they could still finish top 6.
Man, okay. So that's Balls, Lemon Nation, Sneaky, High, and Medios.
Okay, so Lemon Nation's by far my biggest question mark for how good he still is.
Yeah.
Or if he plays the game whatsoever anymore. Even when he was playing the game, he was a question mark. But Medios, very clearly.
I can slip that one in there. Yeah. Even at the very one of the most dominant teams we've ever had.
Love Lemon, always a question mark with how he played. But that's just how they were, right? Sneaky still very clearly, I think we talked about this before. Sneaky still an LCS caliber player if he really wanted to be, even when he retired. Medios is still an LCS caliber player. Balls, as far as I know, is still a high elo player. And I was always very surprised no team picked him up when that Flyquest roster kind of fell apart. Like, always felt like Balls was still one of the best. Like, to me, he was middle of the pack, even the last split he played. And then I believe that if he wanted to put some time, like, his struggle right now is, I don't think he would put in the time to get better at the game. But I do feel like it's not like that sense that I was talking about of understanding the game would still be there. And I feel like that's my hot take. Definitely zero bias involved.
So that's better than Dig, Immortals,
easy.
100 Thieves, and Golden Guardians.
Easy.
Ooh.
I did pick that cutoff of the 4 like bottom teams that are like kind of clearly at the bottom.
So I think 100 Thieves, Golden Guardians might be tough, but even Immortals, since they put the other roster back in,
they do look pretty good. They do look pretty good.
They're looking better now too. But okay. So I'm assuming that you're predicting the C9 original C9 roster to win then.
Oh yeah, I don't think
TSM plus Void Boy.
I don't even think that's a controversial take. I bet you if you did like a fan poll, 90% of people would agree with me on this assessment in terms of when you just look at the TSM roster. I'm not even talking about how good they were at their peak. Just I don't think they're actually playing the game. You have Turtle. Then I think X Special is still coaching somewhere, so he probably still plays the game a bit.
That's what I was thinking. I was most worried about Odd One because he does variety streams, and I don't think he plays League much at all.
He's playing like Civilization and XCOM or something.
Yeah, and similar to Dyrus, he keeps on tweeting out like, "Stop asking me to play League." I do see him on like every few months or something like that. But I think that he's in the same boat where I don't think Dyrus or Odd One play very much at all. Voidboy plays a ton.
It's Voidboy and Turtle are their 2 best players, right? But it's at the point where let's say Reginald had decided to play and Voidboy was something. It was just Turtle. I would say that if we put our 5 casters on a team and had you guys play the TSM team, you guys would take 2, maybe 3 games out of 10 against that TSM lineup.
I have played a show match versus Turtle before, and he dunked on me. So Turtle would definitely be able to carry them.
Just 1v9.
But, yeah.
All right, fine. We forced Turtle into an off roll. A few handicaps here. I don't have faith in this TSM roster. I think this Cloud9 roster is going to completely even if they were mechanically similar, which I don't think they are. I think the 69 roster is clearly better right now. This TSM roster has literally never played together before. So, I mean, Void Boy does, and this is going to be a bit of flame to good old Void Boy, is he has contributed to a lot of TSM wins in the past, though. So,
to be fair, a lot of people had to during the time period where he was playing.
So I'm super excited for the matchup. I think it'll be very fun. I don't think we've announced who's casting it yet. I don't know if you're allowed to even say, but
I think Flowers already said on his stream that me and him are casting it. So
this is gonna be.
I hope that we can. I'm gonna try and pitch and see if we can get a listen in on comm, so we can get a listen in for at least at some point of Cloud9.
Shot call.
Yeah, exactly.
I think it'll be exciting. I hope you roast them on air. Just be like, oh man, these guys are just retired. They're so bad. It's like, it'll be good though. I think
I will stay away from roasting any of the recently benched LCS players because that would be just too raw.
just a little.
Maybe we'll bring Freak in and he'll bring the real flame.
Yeah, I mean Freak would definitely be like,
Freak would be like, this is why that's why you got benched.
Yeah.
I was like, oh my god,
it's like
too real.
Damn. Yeah, it'll be fun. I think it's on Friday at 5 p.m. though. So make sure y'all tune in. We'll be there memeing along with you. I know it's always surprising me when I meet somebody who has started watching League in like 2017. Well, first I'm just like, wow, that's crazy. Like just to think that we have new people coming in. But like when I think of LCS, this classic matchup feels like it happened just yesterday for me. It's pretty crazy.
I'm starting to feel old, like it was a while ago, and reaching back.
Hey man, you're casting from home too, just like the old days. Now it's
true.
It's all vintage here, right?
True.
It'll be good.
All right, that's gonna do it for this episode of 10 Thoughts. You can check us out probably next week. Maybe not actually, because I am going on vacation for week 6. Yeah. Actually, I don't think we are going to have one next week. Scratch that. We'll catch up with you a little bit later, but do turn in to the show match on Friday at 5.